Hi everyone, welcome back to the Property Finance Podcast, and today I want to talk about the 70-20-10 rule. And this is a conversation that I've had with a lot of developers recently, where we've kind of spoken about what you should be focusing your time on and kind of diversifying enough to make sure that you're still safe. Because we've seen far too many developers recently and investors who have got shiny penny syndrome and who are really, really struggling to kind of keep themselves afloat, if you like. So this is kind of going to be my own spin on the 70-20-10. So this in no means is the same as the actual 70-20-10 rule. This is kind of Michael's own version, if you like. So when it comes to the 70-20-10 rule, the premise is that you have your 70%, which I believe should be your main money-making strategy. So if you're a developer, this should be developments. It should be what you are most capable of, and it should be what you do best. So for the client I was speaking to yesterday, 70% for him was focusing on developments. So nothing else, just doing his developments. So getting them done, delivering them on time, on budget, everything else. That is what 70% of his time has to be. Then his 20%, we were talking about he needs to focus on maybe picking up portfolios or trying to acquire small refurbs, that kind of thing. So his 20% is going to be sort of quick, easy wins, if you like. So 20% of his time is going to be focused on that. The other 10% of his time is going to be focused on potentially trying to set up some sort of consultancy or something on the side, whereby just little bits here and there, maybe little site visits, that kind of thing, where 10% of his time is kind of helping others, if you like. Now, he may charge for that, he may not, depends on the person. So for him, that 10% is focusing on helping other people. So it could be charitable stuff, anything like that. That's what that 10 is. What I tend to find actually happens, and this is the problem I have with the property education sector, if you like, is that's reversed. And what you tend to find is some of the people who are out there teaching property, who are doing the courses, everything else, their 70% is teaching. Their 20% is probably consulting or masterminds, that kind of thing. And then 10% is actually doing. And I think the moment that you get to that and your 70-20-10 is in reverse, you shouldn't be doing that. I think if you are a property educator, and this is just purely opinion, so feel free to agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. But if you are getting into property education, your 70% needs to be doing, your 20% needs to be teaching, and your 10% needs to be mentoring and sort of masterminds. So what I mean, but the difference between the 20 and the 10 is 20% is kind of your courses, your free courses, that sort of thing. Your 10% is your proper mentorship, masterminding, that kind of thing. The minute it's in reverse, you shouldn't be in property education, I don't think, personally, because if only 10% of your time is actually doing, how can you then educate people on that? Because you're not in it enough, you're not in the thick of it, you're not kind of dealing with it enough on a daily basis to be able to educate someone else. And that's why, for me, when I look at my 70-20-10, 70% is the brokering, because I've got to be doing that, because how on earth can I sort of portray myself as a broker if I'm not doing brokering? I've then got the 20%, which I would say is probably the actual doing, so getting involved in deals, structuring deals, helping people structure deals, getting involved in my own deals. And then 10% is what you see here, what you're watching now, which is the education, the kind of, I wouldn't really call this education. This is kind of more marketing, if you like, because I'm not doing this for the same reasons that others are doing education. This isn't a funnel. This isn't anything like that. That is, for me, this is just, I have a lot of information in my brain and I want to get it out. And this is evergreen. So we're at nearly 200 episodes, I think, now. So for me, this is just a way of getting that knowledge out of my head, and hopefully it helps some people along the way. So that's kind of how I look at my 70-20-10. So as a developer and investor, you've got to have your main strategy, your kind of short-term win strategy, and then side hustle is kind of what I would class those as. And it's the same no matter what you're doing, whatever industry you're in, whatever. You've got to have that 70-20-10. It's really, really important. And this conversation yesterday was really eye-opening for both of us, I think, myself and the client, to understand actually where time should be spent. And Yeah, I think this ties in nicely with the short-term versus long-term plan, which is you've always got to know what your short-term plan is, you've always got to know what your long-term plan is, and you've always got to know what those three sections are as well. So, yeah, like I said, just a really quick podcast, a little bit of a rant in there about property education yet again. I feel like all I ever do is rant about education. There are some really good educators out there, and I think I should caveat that there are some really, really good people who really do know what they're doing. But there are some absolute sharks as well, unfortunately. So just be really careful with who you choose for property education. Do your due diligence, as I always say, and just double check that 70-20-10 with them as well. Because I think if their 10% is doing, I'd really avoid it, in all honesty. I've never met anyone yet who their 10% is doing and their 70% is education, and them actually turn out to be a good educator. I really think it's got to be the other way around. Education needs to be their side hustle, their side part of their business. I think if the minute you are a property developer making more money from education than developments, you don't have enough knowledge to be able to educate, I don't think. So a controversial opinion, possibly, but one that I will stick by. And yeah, I'd love to hear what other people think and other people's opinions on this. But that's kind of where I sit with that. But yeah, if you found it useful, please like, share, comment. Like I said, I'd love to hear people's views on all of this. But otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.